And now a little bit about today's speakers. Galen Frano is the Director of Distance Education at Northwestern University School of Continuing Studies. She specializes in curriculum design, universal instructional design, and technology-enhanced learning. She has great experience, over 20 years in teaching and learning experience in a variety of formats, and also has a master's degree in education. She also, you might have seen her before, she's been a frequent speaker and host of workshops for various professional organizations, so you might have run into her at some of the teaching and learning conferences. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin, who will start her presentation now.
Hello everyone, and thank you, Lauren, for that wonderful introduction. First of all, can everyone hear me? And I'm going to use that green check mark for yes or the red for no. Everybody can hear me. Looks like it. Perfect. So what I'd like to start out with is I want to make sure that I understand your goals and what you hope to gain out of this session, so I can kind of tailor my presentation to your needs and make sure that we get the questions that you have answered. So if you could use the chat pod as I'm going through this and tell me, you know, what do you hope to gain from today's session, or what burning question do you have that you're really hoping I answer, or maybe it's a struggle, or you just want to get better at helping your faculty or helping yourself give feedback to students. If you could let me know that, that would be wonderful. As I said, I oversee distance education at the School of Continuing Studies for Northwestern University, and I think one of the major topics that we talk about with our faculty and with each other is feedback, and doing feedback effectively with our students. And we also engage our students in that conversation quite often as well. So I'll be sharing a few of our techniques with you. Because everybody uses a different version of Blackboard, I decided not to do sort of a show and tell of Blackboard, because how our system is set up and does things maybe different for you. But if you want to contact me either by phone, email, or even by Twitter, it's on this page. I'll be happy to walk you through anything that might be helpful along the way. I don't see many people chatting. Anyway, I like to have a discussion. So this slide might look very familiar to those of you who are on the instructional design side. It's sort of a typical learning model where we first have some direct instruction to set the context and provide background information. We like online, a big push that we have in our online programs is engagement. And we use Blackboard and some other tools that integrate with Blackboard to really create a rich engagement opportunity for faculty and students, and also students to student and student to faculty. And I'll be talking a little bit about that. And then you really want to get them into this practice and feedback mode. To me, that's where the learning really happens, is a lot of practice, a lot of really great feedback, and that feedback should be moving the student to mastery of the stated goals. A lot of our faculty come and talk about assessment and feedback. And sometimes they might skip over the practice, or maybe they have just a final assessment and feedback. And that can be challenging both for the faculty and students to figure out how to give meaningful feedback in such a short time frame. Any questions so far? You guys are a very quiet group out there. So when we look at feedback, I look at performance as a line, as a floating line actually. That's held up by balloons. Those are the things that the student is doing well, and it's held down by lead weights. And those are things that maybe the student needs to improve upon. And if you think about it in this sort of construct, then we have two different ways that we can increase performance. We can pump up the balloons or add more balloons to pull that line up, or we can cut some weights. And I think the most effective way is to do both. And I think sometimes when we're giving feedback, we focus on the things that the student needs to do better, but sometimes we fail to mention the things that the student is doing good so that they can continue to do that well and can keep pumping up that balloon that already exists. Do you guys find yourself, or maybe other faculty, sort of focusing on what needs to be fixed versus what maybe needs to just continue to be done to do well? You can say green check mark for yes. Ah, there's somebody finally chatting. So one of the things that I think thematically through this presentation is, don't lose sight of the things that the student is doing well. They need to know that. There's a if you remember back to when you were in school, there can be a very visceral reaction when you get a paperback that's all redlined. And, we have great tools online, but still there's that redlining thing that carried over from the red pencil of the instructor. So we'll talk about ways that we can make maybe that visceral reaction be less. So one way to do this is, instead of doing the text markup, so we all probably have seen and done where you get a Word document and you're marking it up with track changes in Word. A different way to do the same sort of thing is to insert audio into PDFs. Students report that they feel like the instructor is sitting next to them and actually verbally walking them through their paper. And it's a great way for the student to really hear your inflection and understand that, like, wow, this is a well-written paragraph, but maybe it doesn't tie to your thesis, for example. And you can, again, address what they did well, which was their writing, but maybe they needed to focus a little bit more and tie that back into their thesis a little bit better. Audio is also good when you really want the student to focus on the message that you're saying. I put video on here too because you can also do video feedback, whether it's through YouTube channel. There's many tools that link to Blackboard, such as Kaltura or MediaSite, that you can also use to do video feedback. And what I do typically is I find that audio works a little bit better when I want them to focus on what I'm saying. The video can be a little distracting. Nobody likes themselves on video anyway. So, you get distracted, and to me, I can produce an audio piece much more quickly than I can video because, I'm a woman and I got to make sure my hair is right and everything's going on, and I don't have to worry about that with audio. So I personally am more of a fan of audio for that individual feedback on, especially on authentic assessments. So Misty had an item there, inline grading. Yep, and I'm getting there, Misty. I think sometimes we forget that there's some basic tools in Blackboard and other tools for self-assessments. And through self-assessments, if planned well, they can also provide feedback to students. If they got it right, it can explain why they got it right to reinforce that message. And if they got it wrong, it can be a redirection. And there's a ton of ways in Blackboard to do self-assessments, whether that's matching or multiple choice, and those tools are built right in the assessment piece of Blackboard. And I would encourage you to, find ways to bring self-assessment, especially for those things that are maybe a little bit more knowledge-based. There is a certain vocabulary with many fields that students just need to become familiar with, for example. You can get them to do that through a discussion board and using the vocabulary correctly. You can also do self-assessments, and even behavioral self-assessments can be helpful, like what would you do in this situation? And you can get into some nuanced pieces. One of the things that we do here at Northwestern is interactive practice pieces. So we build these pieces in Flash and HTML and HTML5 with the faculty in consultation with them. They're very short pieces, but it puts the student into a situation where they have to make decisions, and they have to not just select the right answer, but really it's more of a decision tree. And as I walk through it, the scenario can change, or it can really be like, oops, made a big blunder here, now we're over budget, for example. But again, it's another way to build in that feedback mechanism in a very automated, pre-programmed way. And finally, sample exemplars. So students often ask, can I see a great memo, or can I see an example of a great paper? Or I always struggle with formatting. So those people who teach APA formatting at MLA, I really hats off to you, because I'm always asked for samples and good places to go for that. Peer feedback. I think the MOOC movement, if you haven't been following it, and I don't know how you can be in education and not really follow the MOOC movement, but peer feedback has become kind of a buzzword. I'm curious what you guys think out there of peer feedback. Do you use a lot of peer feedback in your regular classrooms or online classrooms? You could do yes, no. Green check mark is yes, X is no. Okay, so we got a couple no's. I'm curious, a lot of people are saying no. So is there a particular reason? Okay, we do a lot of workshops and in my competitions. Okay. We use instructor peer reviews too. Absolutely. So I was going to say peer feedback is not only great student to student, but also instructor to instructor as well. We found that to be very, very powerful. Oh, can't find a way to use it effectively, Tracy. If you don't mind sharing, Tracy, what do you teach? What kind of topics? Maybe we can brainstorm that a little bit later. Oh, peer review in math, absolutely. Well, it depends on what the math is, right? I mean, if it's about doing an equation, then yeah, there's probably other feedback tools that you can use. But if it's something more in statistics or why we use math, that might be an interesting way to inject peer feedback. So, you know, I was in a presentation recently where the presenter was talking about the why. Oh, there's a good one, Teresa. So why do we learn college algebra? And maybe there's a way to sort of set the context of what you're learning into a problem that the students are facing. And maybe that would be a way to, I don't know, inject some sort of peer feedback. But not everything. I mean, there's no one-size-fits-all here. So, you know, I'm giving you several options to sort of consider. And I think the really great thing about feedback and about Blackboard and all the tools is that you can mix and match. You can try new things. You can innovate things. Oh, yeah, Kathy, students are often uncomfortable giving feedback to peers. Absolutely. So that's hard. Oh, Tracy, physical education. You know, that's interesting. I think you could probably do peer feedback for physical education if you're looking at like your, I don't know, I'm making up stuff now, you know, techniques to shoot a free throw, or maybe it's running mechanics. I don't know, but it'd be interesting. If you ever want to explore it, let me know. You know, peer feedback seems to work well, at least for me, in disciplines that have a lot of writing. So I actually teach English, so it's a great way for students to give each other feedback on drafts of projects or papers. And we do develop grading rubrics, which I'll get to in a little bit, and Blackboard has some great inline grading rubrics as well that can be used. But if you are looking at doing MOOCs, peer feedback is one of the major ways that you'll probably engage students, because it's just one of the ways that you can do the massive amounts of grading that need to be done. Oh, there's Cindy. So visual communication and peer critiques are mandatory as part of their grade. Some students complain, but the majority appreciate the engagement. And I do think that, I don't know if you all agree with this, but I think having students, no matter whether it's K through 12 or higher ed, give peer feedback also teaches other skills in life about how to give constructive feedback and what that feels like. So as they go through their career, they're understanding that people are going to give them feedback and they're going to receive feedback as well. So there's another little component to that. We here at NEU are big into grading rubrics, whether it be for faculty to give to students or peer grading, student to students. For those of you that may be looking at developing rubrics, we have found that students really appreciate a well-written rubric because it sets the expectations for them as to, you know, what is it this instructor expects. It also can make grading and providing feedback so much easier. In Blackboard, you can actually set up your rubric that looks very much like this, where you would determine on the left what excuse me, what criteria you're looking for. So whether it's an importance of sources or anything else, you could put that down. It could be you know, the grammar, the writing, it could be any number of things that you would like. And then you have the categories across the top. So I used a 5 sort of point scale or column. You could use 3, you could use 4, you could use 5. Usually between 3 and 5 is about the right number, I find, for most assignments. And then you give your description of, to the student, what does it look like to be exemplary with your sources? That your sources are interesting and appropriate, and each is clearly relevant to your topic. You may want to add something about properly cited. And as you go down, you know, deficit would be few, if any. Also notice that even though the deficient category is at the far right side, they still put in our point because they're trying. So I know people have different theories on this, and my theory is if somebody's really trying, they should earn some credit, if you will, for the attempt at doing something right. Yes, so Guy, have you tried percentage-based rubrics in order to have one rubric for multiple assignments? Absolutely. So if there is a a lot of papers in the classes, we might write one rubric for all of those papers that address everything. Indeed, and Missy's putting some information out there on Blackboard rubrics that you can repurpose as well. And you know, one of the things that we try to drive here, especially in our master's degree programs, is authentic assessments. And you know, it can be very time-consuming and arduous to review and grade a authentic assessment and provide feedback. And a rubric, at least in my world when I teach, has really helped for me to focus. It also has reduced the number of student complaints about their grade because they clearly knew what I was looking for. And there's really not a lot of debate when I'm able to click the box and put instructor comments about, well, you know, 3 of your 10 resources didn't really address the topic. So it also makes my comments much more focused, which I think helps. And again, you want to put those comments for the positive as well as the things that need to be worked on. I also like to go one step further in feedback, and for those things that need to be worked on, I like to tell the student how to work on those things and point them to some resources, whether it be in the classroom or maybe it's something extra that I'm pulling in and saying, hey, you're really struggling with that APA style, for example, go to the Purdue OWL website here and take a look at their examples and their information. So something along those lines to point them in the right direction. The other thing I think with feedback that's important for students is, you know, there's 24 hours in the day. And our students are busy. Our master's degree students typically hold a full-time job, and they're going to class sort of in their off time. So, you know, they're trying to balance full-time job, going to school, family, and all the other obligations of life. So one of the things that I've come to realize is that in giving feedback, sometimes less is more, meaning that if the student's really struggling in a number of areas, to prioritize the 2 or 3 areas that need the most attention and will, you know, really enhance their work the most, and focus on those. And once they master those, then move on. And again, that goes back to our learning cycle and having lots and lots of opportunities to practice and give feedback. Typically, one practice is not going to be enough for a lot of topics, and they need that multiple different ways to practice and engage. You know, I also like discussion boards and some of the interactive tools, such as journals and wikis, blogs, and the discussion boards are kind of a way to get students engaged, but is also a way that you can give feedback. So on the discussion board, you can, you know, comment and kind of direct the discussion the way you want it to go and let the student know what they've gotten correct, and then ask them to dig deeper maybe on the things that they're not quite sure of. Have students help one another. So that's an important portion of feedback. I will also say, as a class feedback, the Blackboard welcome page, the announcements, can become another way to give the class as a whole some feedback. And I talked about the discussion boards. We write them very much so that they're open-ended, but they really are discussions, not assignments. And we're looking for quality postings and postings over several days rather than a specific number. I know a lot of people are like one response or one initial response and then 2 replies. That's just not something we've done. And what we found is that it is a mechanism of feedback. The students get a lot out of the discussion boards when they're facilitated well through sort of a Socratic method and asking them to dig deeper. We even use discussion boards for those math classes. I know you talked about college algebra. We have several biostats and stats classes, and the discussion boards become a very rich place, not only where they're practicing sort of the more difficult mathematical concepts of the class, but they're also discussing the whys. You know, why is it important to, you know, use linear regression, or why is it important to do these things, and what can it do and what can't it do, and the limitations. So there are, I think, lots of applicability here to give the students feedback. And one of my favorite announcements, so I will read this to you in case you can't read it yourself. It says, the half week that was. So this instructor sends an announcement on a Wednesday, halfway through the week. We run our courses starting on Monday. Everything is due on Sundays at 11:55, and that keeps it consistent for our adult population that's balancing all these things. They don't have to worry about one class having something due on a Tuesday and another class on a Wednesday. It's very consistent for them. So this is a Wednesday morning sort of announcement that we also email blast, which is a very click of a button in Blackboard. And she's telling the class the discussions are lovely. She's talking about filibustering, and she talks about, you know, discussions of all of this has been really nice and pretty thorough. She's talking about posting. So she is giving feedback to the class as a whole that they're doing a good job. So I think we have to look at feedback from the big course level feedback to maybe even student group feedback to the individual student. And then there's also, as you guys brought up, feedback to the instructor. So mechanisms, and I think, you know, Blackboard has great survey capabilities. A lot of faculty, and myself included, do a midpoint anonymous feedback survey so that, you know, we're getting some information back, letting us know how we're doing and where we can course correct along the way. In addition, we just had some major storms. You can also give feedback about your own personal situation. This happens to be on our Evanston campus after a storm back in 2011. And, you know, the joke was this is in an online class, that maybe coming to class isn't such what it's cracked up to be, and maybe being online is a good thing. But, you know, there's different ways to give feedback. So I'd like to pause here and get some questions and thoughts from you guys. What is it that you want to know more about? What is it that you'd like to, you know, get into with the rest of our time together here today? So I see several people have questions, so just type them into the chat pod below. Okay, so Kathy says, how do you incorporate wikis, blogs, and journals? Let's start with that one. So, you know, we're actually revising our Masters of Science and Information Systems master's curriculum. And for that population, wikis really speak to them, and blogs as well. It is where information technology folks go to get their information. So we've actually designed some assignments around wikis and blogs. So you know, students can go out and find great resources and annotate them and put them into the course wiki. And then that course wiki can become something that the students can take with them throughout the program and keep building on it. Blog is the same thing. You know, you can have assignments around, you know, blogging about course concepts and how they apply to your professional or personal life. journals are actually really powerful, and we've had a number of our faculty, and I'm actually excited to experiment a little bit more with this myself, using private journals. So, it's one-on-one, but it's more of a reflection of, what did you think about this week's topic, and how are you going to implement that, or maybe not implement it, and why wasn't it of you? But journals seem to be a really great place to do reflection on what is going on, and then the instructor can give feedback. And it's also a way to connect a little bit more on a personal level with your student, because you get to know what their goals are, what their struggles are, and you can sort of start to craft and hone the class to meet those needs and provide that extra support. Let's see, did that help you, Kathy? I'd be interested, is anybody else out there using wikis, blogs, and journals that can add on to Kathy's? Alberta, have you used a peer evaluation tool in Blackboard? We've used both the peer evaluation tool as well as the inline grading and the grading rubric tool. So we try to leverage as much as we can within the system, and that way we don't have to send students out to third parties. We also like the building block concept that Blackboard uses, so we can interface with things like Adobe Connect, YouTube, media site. I believe U of I is using Kaltura, which has a Blackboard building block as well. So all of those tools can be very seamlessly integrated with Blackboard. And to me, being the director of a program that has to be sustainable, that's really important to me, because students, when we actually watch them work, if they get taken to another window, a lot of times the Blackboard window can be hidden behind it, and then they kind of get lost about where to go or how to close out. So as many things as we can leveraging in Blackboard, we do. Other questions or thoughts? Oh, there you go. Have you found surveys to be useful for formative evaluation of the course? We have. We use anonymous surveys at several points during the class. Many of our instructors just sort of use them on their own to, like I said, get that first half of the class sort of feedback to figure out what to sort of tweak and change and what they could do better at for the second half. We do have some instructors also doing surveys as an add-on portion to introducing themselves. So the students will introduce themselves, but they'll also get sort of a pre-course survey, and it'll ask them, what are your goals and what's your experience and things like that. And the instructors can use that information to help tailor the course, and also even to create good study groups with maybe somebody who's more advanced and somebody who needs a little bit more help along the way, and pair them that way, so that and it works really well from a feedback point, because the expert will say, well, this is the way we're going to do it, and maybe the novice will say, wait a minute, why? I don't understand. And it actually creates sort of a feedback loop between those two people, and a nice little discourse from which they can learn, and the expert can help break down their knowledge into usable steps and understand at a deeper level why they do the things that they do. So we use them a lot. All right, Troy, since you're a writing professor, how do you manage the 8.2 million? Now, we're not being exaggerating, are you? Papers you have to grade. You have to send just 5 minutes per 5-page essay. That's 7 hours nonstop. It is hard. I mean, and, not only papers, but, we have faculty that are doing great things with building websites and portfolios and databases. Let's not even get into the predictive analytics folks who are doing math and papers. It can be arduous, and I guess a couple different things. The grading rubrics really have helped, but to your point, 5 minutes per page is kind of difficult. I will say, though, that the grading rubrics have helped. It made it more fair. I'll be honest, when I first started teaching, I didn't really know how to grade these papers, because nobody told me how. So I'd mark them up. I'd spend hours on a paper, and I'm like, oh, what am I doing? And the students would flood my office hours with questions about why'd you mark this wrong and that wrong. And that's where, for me, it was kind of the great savior of the grading rubric, because it really helped me streamline the time and really helped me hone in on what I was looking for in the paper. But it does take time. So I guess I would say, do you have the option to get a TA? Do you have the option of getting, graduate help or something along those lines to maybe help you? If you have a really great rubric, then this can help you. Is there a way that maybe you could implement some peer review of the students beforehand and make that part of their grade? And maybe that will get you better product so that you can spend less time. I'm not quite sure, but that's an interesting question and one that we all face. Misty, yes, the jigsaw method. Absolutely. Okay, let's see. Alberta, our MPA program uses group work where students need to evaluate each other. So I'm interested in the self and peer assessment tool specifically. And I'm happy to follow up with you after this series, if you'd like, to talk about the ways that we actually implemented it. We're learning a lot more, honestly, about the peer feedback from our work on MOOCs. We've launched 3 MOOCs, and we're going to do 3 more at the beginning of the year. And I will tell you, it took a whole nother level to write a rubric for a truly international audience. I mean, our regular distance learning goes to about 22 countries, but with MOOCs we went to 155. So we really had to be very, very careful about even the wording on the grading rubric. So I would be happy to talk to you about that in a one-off. Oh, look at that, Misty's on it. For journals, here are some prompts. Oh no, Troy, you're at a community college, no TAs here. My students tell me, thanks for the in-depth feedback on the rubric. I don't tell them. You know what, I will say though, one thing, Troy, that did help me as well is to have the students submit the paper in PDF format, and then I could insert audio. Believe it or not, I can speak a lot faster, as you might have noticed, than I can type, although I am a pretty good typist as well. But it really helped me speed up my thoughts. So what I did is I used a grading rubric to sort of click in Blackboard and provide the grade, and then I inserted my audio file very quickly and posted that paper up. So maybe looking at something along those lines, it'll save you some carpal tunnel too. So, maybe. Oh, there you go. Misty's helping you out too. And I will tell you, there's a tool, and I'm going to put it here in the Audacity. I just typed it in the chat pod, called Audacity. It's free. You just download it, and it lets you record and also edit audio, and it can turn it into like MP3, MP4, and you can just attach those in a lot of different places. I will even do some audio announcements, especially if I want them to think through something, or I want them to sort of, I want to take them on a journey. Audio is a great way to do that. I also use video in YouTube. We have a closed YouTube channel that we post things to. I actually just posted one this morning. I teach faculty development, so to our new faculty, sort of an onboarding training and then faculty development. And I just did some video to the class as a whole to give them some feedback on expectations and things like that. So that's good. Oh, there you go. A Voki avatar for audio feedback. Absolutely. So what other questions do you guys have? Because I'm really here to, provide. And I will say that another area that we are working on is a mentorship program and also peer-to-peer feedback, which it's developing, but we are creating sort of, or actually our second generation rubric for the classroom, and also what we feel is a good online teaching experience, an online course, things along those lines. And there's lots of rubrics out there for you to draw upon in that area. For those of you who don't know it, there's Quality Matters rubric. There's also one by Sloan C. That you can draw on and start thinking about, what does a good classroom experience look like, or what does a good student experience look like? And I think that's where we're driving towards right now, is the student experience. We want that experience, whether it be in a physical classroom or online, first of all, to be equitable. We want that same learning experience no matter which one, and we want it to be Northwestern standards, to be rigorous. But we also want that student experience to be very positive. And, what does that look like? So finding a good grading rubric that doesn't boil it down, into a bunch of rules can be difficult. But it's definitely, I think, worth the work to do that and to have that self-reflection. I think having a reflective practice of teaching is so important, and to really be open to the feedback. And I think that's what I want to sort of end, this last piece with is, being open to feedback. And not all students or people in general are open to feedback. So I think it's also the way that we deliver feedback. And again, going back to that line being pulled up by the balloons and being dragged down by those lead weights, if you start out with some balloons, who doesn't like balloons, right? Start out with some things they did good. It's a little bit more palatable then to hear the things that you need to work on. And then to give them tips on how to work on them or resources is really great. And if you could differentiate those, because you're the expert and they're looking to you to point them in the right direction, because obviously they might have engaged with everything in the classroom and they might be going, I read the chapter 3 times. They may need another resource. So, knowing what's out there, whether it be in the world of open educational resources, or maybe something you have access to, or maybe just a phone conversation to connect you and say, this is what I'm talking about, is also helpful. So don't forget that even though we're in this electronic world of Blackboard, sometimes picking up the telephone is just very powerful, or Skyping, or whatever it is you do to get that message across can be very, very important to a student and really make the difference between them sticking not only with the class but with the program. Is somebody reached out to them and cared enough to make that connection and try to get them maybe the help that they need and the feedback that they were looking for. But I will say that not everybody is open to feedback. So, I've had this 1 or 2 students along the way that, have really not maybe appreciated my feedback. And, sometimes I have to take a deep breath and say they can't please all the people all the time. So we take a deep breath. Oh, and then Lauren just put in there, Misty, thank you for the value rubrics. And then Lauren put in about the Blackboard Exemplary Course rubric, and that is something that we did here, and we actually won a Catalyst Award from Blackboard, and that was presented at Blackboard World. It is, I actually really enjoyed doing the Blackboard Exemplary Course application, because it did allow us to sort of reflect back over what do we do well and what do we need to work on. What they ask you to do is do a self-evaluation of your course. And the great thing that you get back, speaking of feedback, is you actually get the reviewer's comments back at the end of the process. So even though we won a Catalyst Award, we were able to get this feedback to see what we did well and maybe what we needed to maybe just tweak a little bit to make even better. So I would encourage you all, if you haven't looked at the Blackboard course awards, that you do so, and really, if nothing else, look at that rubric, because it is very helpful in thinking about how do you engage with students. And I think my excitement is that look at that, new submission window on December 1st. But I think right now is a great time to be in learning because there are so many tools. I mean, you can give feedback, you know, you can write on a piece of paper, right? If you're in the classroom and hand it back. You can do track changes. You can insert audio. You can do video. You can do a text announcement and video. And there's just so many mix and match things that you can do. You know, rubrics are becoming sort of more mainstream. They're being put into, you know, the LMS so that you can use them right from there and create them as part of your course build process. And you can, you know, really engage the students through helping one another, which is building that community and having your classroom be that safe place that students can say, I just don't get it, and I need some help. And that's feedback from the student to you, right, to say I need that help. And to me, it's a great thing when a student feels comfortable enough to say, wow, thank you for that, but I need help over here. When people come to you for help, it's a sign that you're giving good feedback, that you're trusted, and that they really want to learn from you. So don't look at feedback or students wanting more feedback as something negative. I think we really have to look at it as something positive. And I know, I appreciate the 2.5 million papers. I really do. But making that connection, especially what we do mostly here is the online learning component, you know, really making that connection online can be very powerful. And to also have your students form a community that's long-lasting and they can draw upon as alums years down the road is very, very important. So I know that Lauren said I should present about 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes, but I'd really be interested in hearing from you guys. So give me some feedback. Was this session helpful to you? What else would you like to know?
And I just wanted to jump in really quick, Caitlin. So just first off, thank you. Thank you for presenting. So it was wonderful, and it was great to see your interaction. And I just took off the audio restriction. So if anyone would also like to verbally, you know, talk to Caitlin and engage in discussion that way, you are more than welcome to. I know we normally keep it to chat, but since we have a few extra minutes, you can feel free to use your VoIP headset and just press the talk button, and then you can. We'll all be able to hear you.
Oh, perfect. So some live audio. So what questions do you guys have? Or maybe there's situations or your specific class. I see Carolyn's typing. Hope I pronounced that right. Thank you. And again, if anybody wants to follow up with me on anything in particular, feel free to do so. I will go back and put my, my information up here. There's my contact information. My Twitter handle's there, email. Okay, so Carolyn's asked me to talk about more of our discussion boards. Yes, you know, I did a lot of consulting work before coming to Northwestern, and to be quite honest, one of my pet peeves was when people turned the discussion board into an assignment with kind of a right or wrong, or it was a very sort of black and white question. And I thought, wow, that's not a discussion. That is not what happens in the classroom. So we worked really hard, and it's probably one of the places that we spend probably the most or second most time with faculty when we craft a course is in writing really good discussion board prompts. And what we ask them to do is to really write an open-ended question that there is no right or wrong answer really, but students can discuss it. So for example, in our public policy and administration program, I had an instructor come and say, I don't know what to do with this, Caitlin, but when I start my class, the first thing I do on the first night of the class is I stand in front of blank whiteboards and I ask the class, how has public policy touched you from the time you woke up until now? And I said, oh my God, what a fantastic discussion board question. And he's like, well, I don't know. I said, it's going to work. This question generated, mind you, our classes have between 20 and 25 people. That one question in less than a week generated over 300 responses. Because as people started talking about, well, my drive, you know, the speed limit. And then people are like, but wait, the tollways, but wait, my driver's license. but wait, gas and this and this. And pretty soon, somebody said, my medication I take in the morning. Well, then that spun off. So we try to structure them in a way that are very open-ended. We also work with faculty to think of follow-up questions, to dig into them. So, there are times where, especially in the math-related classes, sometimes it can be very hard to get that open-ended so that it really supports a true discussion and discourse throughout a whole week. So what we sometimes will do with those classes is put a difficult problem in, but then have 2 or 3 backup questions that can be inserted in as well. So it might be something a little bit different, like what would happen if we change this to this, or what might be the effects of that. So they're kind of follow-up questions that can be tagged on by the faculty to help them facilitate a discussion. And that's what we really want, is that discussion where the instructor is sort of guiding it and saying, well, wow, that's a great opinion, but what do you have to prove that? So it's a great way to get students to really do some research and how to write with that in mind and back up their thoughts. I hope that helps. But that was really important, at least to us in our programs. No problem. What other questions? You can always talk too. Again, just push that talk button up there. Oh, some more people are chatting here, I see. Hope I didn't miss anybody. Okay, that's a suggestion. I often use a TED video that relates to a course concept to serve as a catalyst for discussion. Actually, you could do that too. Pulling in video is a great way. We even have faculty sometimes do a video discussion board where they're actually posing the question. So it's interesting along the way. Oh, great, Kathy. I'm glad that I've been able to help you a little bit. If you, like I said, need any follow-up, just let me know. Happy to help. Well, if there's no more questions, I will turn this back over to Lauren to sort of close out. But if there is questions, I'm still in the chat. And again, feel free to follow up with me later.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. Again, thank you everyone for participating in the engagement, because it really does make these sessions much more effective for everyone, sharing those ideas. So thank you all. Just a reminder that this was being recorded. We will send out a copy of the recording either tomorrow or Wednesday with a link to the link on YouTube and also the presentation slide. So you'll have Caitlin's contact information in there as well. Another big round of thank yous to our presenter today, Caitlin, and all of our participants. Just a reminder that our last bits will be on December 9th, but we are always looking for new topics and new speakers. So feel free to email me, and I will pop my email into the chat anytime just for suggestions or whatnot, and we hope to see you in our last session on December 9th. So thank you all.